Hey, Vanessa.
Hey, Adaam.
Today we have Mike Pesca, a long-term host of The Gist, who is now also hosting the How To podcast.
Wow, I think I incepted that introduction.
I have no idea where it came from.
The puppet master.
Mike is the award-winning journalist, host of the longest-running daily podcast, The Gist. Is that true, Vanessa? Can you fact-check?
Oh my God, on the spot? Absolutely not.
No, there's a qualifier there. It's the longest daily running news/analysis or news and analysis podcast. Because there Keith and the Girl is a podcast where Keith talks to the girl, apparently. I haven't listened in a few years. That's been going on longer. I know that one. There are a few. And then there are a bunch of podcasts that were radio shows and they just put them on podcasts and they're still going. I acknowledge that, but we're podcast. We started as a podcast and we'll die as a podcast.
in your new show, and How To. Tell us about it.
How To, it's not self-explanatory because I'm here to explain it. People ask a question, such as some of the questions we've entertained so far is how to protect my elderly relatives from scammers, how not to say when I talk, how to do a little ghost busting at home, how to get buff and jacked, or maybe jacked and buff. You know, some of the more, and then we pair this question asker with an expert and have a little bit of whimsy along the way. So that's the idea of How To.
Is a non-expert this person who asked the question?
We call them the civilian. Yes, they're both our guests, and someone will come on and say, I live on an abandoned military base, and I think I'm experiencing ghosts. And then we go out and we find an expert with the British Museum who wrote a book about ghosts in Mesopotamia, and we try to figure out if there really are ghosts in the military exhibit installation. But, you know, it's always about something else. So that one, was it really about ghosts, or was it about my skepticism versus the vast array of humanity for all time overwhelmingly believing in something like ghosts? I also was just hearing about how Ernest, is it Shackleton, saw a ghost when he was on one of his expeditions, and then days later, he asked the other two guys, and we saw the same ghost, but scientists have figured out that what we do is kind of project, when we're in extreme situations, we project human forms visually outside ourselves for some reason, and they could actually stimulate this in the lab. So we could make someone see a ghost when it's not a ghost.
Interesting. My sister had a ghost experience, but it wasn't a visual. It was weird. It was like a physical interaction, which was also in a moment of distress.
Was it a ghost or a demon like Tucker Carlson?
No, definitely a ghost.
The demon question actually came up because our Mesopotamian expert made a clear distinction. Ghosts are different from demons, and he laid us all through it. And in ancient Mesopotamia, one might hire what we consider an exorcist or someone to help you with ghosts, as we might hire a contractor or even someone to do some work. Yes, it's just very common, and be kind of silly not to, since obviously ghosts exist and you got to deal with them.
This was never a subject of interest or serious concern for me, but, in my Jewish upbringing, there's always an emphasis.
You're Jewish? Oh.
On rejection of ghosts. It's an interesting little point of history where the priests wrote all the liturgy, really wanted to eliminate the profession. Maybe it was like a guild thing. They wanted to eliminate the profession of exorcism and witchcraft and all that stuff. But obviously, it still went on. So you don't see it in the texts because they're trying to ignore it. But you have actual records of all the Jews of secretly worshiping angels and putting charms against demons. So it's really interesting, the little shadowy world of ghosts and demons that they clandestinely, heretically believed in. And they all have the weirdest freaking names. Because you all have the Christianized name, like Azazel. We have those sounds for demons. But the real Mesopotamian secretly Jewish demons had the weirdest freaking names with so many syllables that I can't pronounce.
Yes. This is where abracadabra comes from. And we even got into, there's some aspects of the names. Like there used to be, when the ancient Mesopotamians did their ghost exorcism, there was a clause at the end that said, and including any demon or spirit we might not have anticipated. And then any ghost or any demon became the name of a demon. So this was one of the worst demons haunting Mesopotamia, was any demon, because it was kind of named in the contract. I think it was like the point was to haunt the lawyers, which might be a good thing.
My favorite is a guy called Ketev Meriri, which is, first of all, Meriri is very sound. It's like it's bitter, but it also sounds kind of slimy. And he would show up in the shadows during the high holidays. So we need to avoid the shadows because that's where Ketev Meriri will get you.
So were you saying that the early Jewish people were like, yeah, I know, Rabbi, I know this is your teaching, but come on, we got to do this. What are we going to be, idiots and leave ourselves vulnerable to the ghosts?
Of course they are hedging their bets.
Yeah. This makes sense.
Does the mezuzah have any talismanic properties or not at all?
No, I mean, it is a talisman, I suppose, but it is technically kosher in the sense that it is just a line from the Torah.
Okay.
It doesn't refer to all those unmentionables.
Okay, it doesn't like prevent vampires from coming through the threshold.
No, it doesn't prevent vampires.
Oh, is the portion in every mezuzah the same?
I think so. I think it's supposed to be.
Interesting.
But, that's not my profession.
You're not a mezuzist. How to
mezuzah.
Yeah, how to mezuz.
So, we brought you here to celebrate your new project, and we, encourage all our listeners who are curious or have questions, including how to get me to stop umming in the middle of a sentence, to send them to Mike, and maybe you'll get to be heard. Where does one send their queries?
How about how-to at mikepesca.com? How-to at mikepesca.com. And we're also specifically looking for people who want to ask certain questions, like how to get jacked and buffed. We have a parenting expert, Ophira Eisenberg, who will give some parenting advice. We just need some good parenting questions. So if you have any good parenting questions, lay it on us. And we have actually, I don't think this is the technical term, a poopologist, but someone who has studied the best ways, methods relating to the gastrointestinal.
But parenting is interesting. I'm a new parent.
Do you have a boy or a girl, Vanessa?
I have a 1-year-old boy.
We would take either. By the way, questions about either. Yeah.
I thought you were saying you take him. You'll take him.
We take a boy.
We'll take boys. Right. We'll take girls.
We need associate producers. We'll just take it.
I mean, they're probably about as good as AI at this point.
We'll raise them to be associate producers one step ahead of what Claude can do.
So last time we had you on, I guess last time I had you on because Vanessa was during her maternity leave, we got sidetracked into, I think, a 20-minute discoursation about the question of nihilism. Mm-hmm. That actually nudged me to try at least to articulate my thoughts a little more clearly on what it is that I worry about in nihilism, and it helped me distinguish the line between any kind of nihilistic behavior that simply, seems to be either power-driven or unprincipled moral abandon that seems to be guiding a lot of American political discourse these days. And the thing that I am actually concerned about, or more concerned about, which is the phenomena that I clunkily try to term annihilism, which is taking it a step further, being so enmeshed with your hatreds, your frustrations, with your culture war, with your hostility towards the world around you, that you have reached the conclusion that the only solution for the world's woes is burning it all down. And the more I thought about it, the more I saw it related to a thread that runs through Western culture. That is you can say the revolutionary thread, a truly bloody, purging, redemptive sort of revolution, bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, that is associated with, on one hand, some of the utopian movements, but also just a deep aesthetic desire to, break through the shackles of the oppressive everyday and see the system burn and see the institutions topple and either usher in a new, better world or just relish in the bloody carnage in itself because it's better than our oppressive everyday. And maybe it's just something that our society goes through every few decades, every few hundred years. Maybe it's just something cyclical that our society needs to experience. But it seemed to me that there's been a rise in accepting that kind of purging, total burn it all down energy in the public discourse over the past few years. And it is that my attention is drawn to. So I sent you the article after I wrote it. We chatted a little bit about that. I wonder if you have new opposition to my thesis.
Yeah, I don't know if it's opposition. Since we talked, it's definitely that concept has definitely evolved and I think been embraced by right and left. I don't know if you were aiming at one end of the political spectrum more. Maybe back then in our pre-post woke era, so maybe our woke era, there was more campus radicalism and explicit calls to burn it all down from the left, whereas conservatives wanted to conserve. Maybe it's the case that we're seeing a lot more nihilism on the right, but if you look at the Manosphere, and I just saw that documentary by Louis Theroux, which the specifics, I don't know, did either of you guys see the Manosphere documentary?
No, my sister recommended it, but I didn't watch it because it looked very cringe, so I wasn't sure if I could handle it.
He does well. He's very skilled at making himself look like the patsy or the schlub, but to great effect, and then turning it around on the person who's kind of trying to attack him. So yeah, in the Manosphere, there is a nihilism. There is the idea that we're all being controlled by a sinister cabal who wants to keep you down. And of course, how many steps from sinister cabal to the Jews? Not very many in the Manosphere. And we meet some, pretty significant players, though not the biggest. So for me, I had never heard of these guys. And I'm like, wow, so that's how they operate. I see how they do their thing. They're kind of not different from the different kind of Svengalis who existed, the anti-women's Svengalis, the investment Svengalis. Great way to lose your money, great way to lose, any sense of morality or proportion. But yeah, there's a lot of nihilism there. Sometimes this is called being black-pilled. I do think that most of it is, you'll get intellectual people telling you that it's a logical reaction to how bad material circumstances are, right? Whenever things are this bad, there's a call for revolution. Or in the first book about the meritocracy, the idea was if the meritocracy gets too crazy by 2033, there's literally going to be a revolution because the people who aren't deemed to be meritocratically blessed will rise up. I think that's all nonsense. I think we just live in an age of rampant information. So 20 years ago, we were all atomized, not Adamized, but atomized, and we couldn't connect with each other. And crazy, negative ideas of burn it all down really just were kept cauterized in their little bubbles, but now they can cross mingle. And so it seems, and we are getting more of it, but not for any real reason. I don't think, I think that it's worth rejecting, but I think most of our, not even going to say serious, but everyone who's not explicitly endorsing some sort of black-pilled or some sort of revolutionary fervor, I think inherently rejects this, right? They don't have to say it. So let's just take an example. Some actor who you like, who's actively going out there and creating art and trying to create meaning, they're not nihilist. And so that's the vast majority of the people that we admire, or some athlete. Every athlete who's successful is trying really hard at their craft. They're not nihilists. Their work has meaning. So it's this odd thing, and I've talked too long, but the nihilists and the burn it all down crowd are easily identifiable as such, whereas the counter argument is just doing their thing and imbuing their life and other people's lives with as much meaning as they can.
So I think you actually pointed to one of the areas where we disagree. I think that there are many artists, and artists is a great example because some of our artists today are the worst offenders to me in the propagation of annihilism. And the reason that is the case is I'd say twofold. One, many artists are just being drawn by whatever they consider to be the salient trend on their political side. A fine example of that is all the Hollywood actors who had the bloody hand tattoo or the tag or, pin worn to their Hollywood appearances or red carpet appearances over the past 2 years, whether or not they understood that the red hand that they were using to supposedly support poor Palestinians under Israeli onslaught was actually a symbol derived from the literal lynching and dismembering of Jews, with red hand symbolizing the bloodied arm of one of the dismemberers celebrating the death of the Jews. And this is the symbol that they decided to adopt. Did they adopt it knowing that they were quite literally celebrating annihilism? No. I mean, maybe some of them, but even if they didn't, they did it because they comfortably embrace the imagery of it because of some kind of peer pressure, psychological pressure, or social movement influence. Second, though, and to me, this is the more interesting thing that I was trying to get at in my article, I think artistically, there is something seductive about the annihilistic position. People are often excited about the stories of the French Revolution, are excited about the stories of the rabble rising against the aristocrats and tearing out their skins and dragging them to the guillotine. Those imageries of purging society from the rot in a very violent way excites a part of the human psyche. And artists are often, will be much more drawn to these kind of edgy, violent storytelling and aesthetics than to something that celebrates a status quo. The status quo itself seems to have some kind of pejorative tinge to it for an artist.
Yeah. It's bourgeois.
It's bourgeois, right. And shocking the bourgeoisie is the mission of the true romantic artist. So I think that the aesthetic passion, in addition to the social pressure, is actually driving artists that, you can say that they're just chasing their artistic fascination and building meaning for themselves. But in the process, they are, in fact, perpetuating a lineage of annihilism. And I don't think that's trivial.
How are they perpetuating it? Are they perpetuating it in their art, though, is my question? Because I feel like there's a lot of, like you mentioned, like the guillotine and the French Revolution. It's like, yeah, I think I actually just sent you like a comedy special from a guy who mentions the guillotine and the audience gets like, yeah, like kill them all. Like there is this like bloodlust in lefty circles, some of whom will be artists, but like, well, where is the...
By the way, and I agree with Mike that it's not, I've never said that it's just the left. I think the left...
Yeah, left, no, and on the right, I also agree that there's a different type of bloodlust. Sometimes they weirdly converge, which is also very interesting.
Right.
But but you were making the point of artists. So like, to what extent are we seeing, I suppose, an aesthetic of annihilism, or like something productively embracing the annihilistic?
I mean, what's the difference? What's the difference? At some point, if you get immersed in an artistic message, and you get into your head that this is what a purge looks like. This is what, sorry, not a purge. This is what redemptive end looks like. Anything short of that suddenly feels unsatisfying. Because you were raised on those images. You were raised on a narrative that this is how society heals itself. And then suddenly, when your politicians compromise and your city is not immediately fixed or your country is not immediately fixed, and you're not getting the most extreme results by your politician, you feel like, well, you're all corrupt because I have in the back of my mind this image of what a healed society looks like. And a healed society is one where the heads of my enemies are rolling down the street.
Yeah. So first of all, on that red hand, it's really interesting. You're right if you research the actual history of it, but it's been so sanitized that if a regular decent person who just thought, I don't know, free Palestine, and it's sad that 70,000 people have died, research that red hand and what it means, and if it means what Adaam says, they would find by looking at ChatGPT and Wikipedia they would find a contradiction of what you said, because what ChatGPT picks up is what is most constantly written. And I've done this. I'm like, wait a minute, I know what that means. And it is just contradicted by our sense-making technology. That while some allege this, others, Mark Ruffalo, have rebranded it as not that at all. And since, there's over 1 billion Muslims and 10 million Jews, that wins. I mean, that's kind of the definition of truth on a lot of our social media and Wikipedia, and not even just social media, AI. So that's kind of, I don't know, that might be nihilistic. But I've always,
that sounds
I think
quite almost definitionally. I mean, first of all, before even getting to the annihilistic part, on a nihilistic level, where you've just pulled the rug under the ability to, land on or converge on a shared truth.
Right. Like nothing matters.
Nothing matters. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Of course, we know for a fact that this is the only reason that the red hand is associated with Palestinian circles is because of that one historical imagery. That's where it started.
Like, I don't know if 20 years later or 15 years later, someone wanted to say, it doesn't really mean that. And everyone believed them. That seems to be a classic propaganda technique.
Of course. And of course, the same people will not, will they have the same generosity when they see somebody with a swastika or waving a Confederate flag? Well, 150 years ago, the Confederate flag was loosely associated with slavery, arguably. Some argue that the Confederate flag may have been loosely associated with slavery, but people waving it today in Virginia are only expressing their association with a lost legacy.
Right. But that's because how facts are determined, especially technologically, it's just by taking a median of what is asserted online. And so you have more people saying the red hand doesn't mean that than does, and that becomes what is asserted to be the truth. And that didn't happen with the swastikas.
So democratizing truth, I think, is one pathway to nihilism, right?
Yeah, it definitely has a lot of downsides, because truth stands athwart the popular vote.
Ought to.
Yes, that's true.
Right. So,
well, no, the actual qualities of truth, right?
If you believe,
not our agreed upon definition of truth,
assuming that assuming we believe in such a notion, which obviously many academics will reject as a white supremacist.
That fits in with nihilism and annihilism and the postmodern idea of nothing actually being real. But let me just inject this always ever thus idea. And artists have always been drawn to chaos to some extent, and they've always been drawn to bold statements and challenging expectations and being enthralled by that life and those statements. And it's always been like that during my life. And I've loved some very, radical statements, but I wouldn't take them seriously. I listen to the lyrics of Public Enemy, and I don't think that Farrakhan's a prophet that you think you ought to listen to. But that's what Chuck D said, and it fit the meter. And I'm like, all right, fine. Chuck D was doing a number of things, and I bet he did like Farrakhan at a time, and maybe he still does now. But Flava Flav was just in it for the clocks and the ladies, right? So the pose is punk rock. I love a lot of punk rock. I don't subscribe to any of the policy prescriptions, such as they are, of punk rock. And a lot of those people have evolved and look back and say, oh, that's what we had to do at the time. One of our most nihilistic seeming artists is Billie Eilish, talking about how America, or we're standing now on stolen land. But her art is a fun song like Bad Guy, right? A little electronica. So there are a couple of trends where you can't really take the art too seriously. You never should. You can't take the artist too seriously. The comportment, the makeup of an artist, I think is good to be a bit radical. And then a lot of times the people who avow their most nihilistic sentiments. So let's take Mark Ruffalo, Javier Bardem, and Billie Eilish. They're making very comforting, kind of non-challenging Marvel superhero type art. So they would probably say they're not nihilists. I think that Mark Ruffalo thinks that they're not nihilists or unnihilists. They think they're, in the tradition of those who are holding hands and being progressive. That's what he would say he is. And so it's a difference, right? The people online, the Manosphere guys, and a lot of the Zohran Mamdani's dad, at least, are explicit revolutionaries. And I think that Ruffalo is the sort of critic who definitely flatters himself by saying, I'm on the right side of history and I don't want to tear it all down, but I'm just like civil rights activists of the 1960s who weren't nihilists. They believed in the system. And then he goes and plays the Hulk for the 8th time.
Yeah, and while wearing a Confederate badge.
Oh, the red hand. Yeah, the equivalent.
But see, I mean, with people like Ruffalo and many of the self-congratulating Hollywood figures, yeah, of course, they're more complacent, smug, and feckless than they are thoughtful revolutionaries. I think, Zoran Mamdani's dad is a thoughtful revolutionary. I think he is a very, very much a mindfully an nihilist, intentionally an nihilist, whereas Mark Ruffalo is not anything but an impressive actor. That's all he is, but filling the void of his empty intellectual life with cliches. But my concern is that when you fill your empty intellectual life with cliches, it does matter. Like if the cliches that you're adopting are the equivalent of a Confederate flag or a swastika cliche, and that's the thing that becomes the symbol around which you organize yourself and the groups that you associate yourself with, it doesn't matter if in your mind you are just locking arms with Martin Luther King in peaceful protest against segregation. What you actually are promoting is genocidal, annihilistic ideologies. And those, I don't think that immediately, A, B, and C, like A leads to B, B leads to genocide. I don't think anything like that. But but it is making horrible ideas more accepted. And when people are actively pushing towards the extreme ends of these views, you are creating an easier, smoother, less frictionless pathway for that to happen. Because tomorrow when the DSA and the other groups around this country who are true annihilists will say the next demand is, we've done Palestine, now we're going to demand attention to Cuba or attention to support to China or to China's right to take Taiwan or whatever the next mission on the list is. They'll have a direct line into culturally to Ruffalo. It's like, hey, Ruffalo, you said that you were with us. You wore the hand. Why aren't you now supporting us with Taiwan? And that pressure does not necessarily mean that all those actors will align and the same energy of messaging will happen in, the Oscars 2028. But it is possible that Oscar 2028 is going to be about we need to stand with the Chinese indigenous right to take over Taiwan, right? It's not impossible. And I think that
no way. Not given China's tentacles into the film industry. No way. Yeah.
Exactly.
Never.
Not Hollywood. Not our Hollywood.
Right.
So I'm saying it's like those things. I'm not hysterical about it, but I think ignoring it or thinking that it's just a stupid little pin. The artistic cliches that people embrace and make part of their day-to-day surroundings does shape people's expectations and behavior and the sort of pressures that guide their political choices and also the political choices that then get transmitted to the followers of these influencers. I don't think it's trivial.
Yeah, I wish Javier Bardem would not be as wanton in the expression of his beliefs, but I put him in a misguided tradition that thus far we've been able to deal with. And, I also have different virtues like pluralism and the acceptance of even bad views. So I look at especially how they express their anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist sentiment. And I think about Vanessa Redgrave, who received an Academy Award and talked about the Zionist thugs outside who were protesting her latest project. And then actually Patty Chayefsky, who wrote Network, I think he won the Academy Award for that one, but it might have been something else. He got up there and said, I wish Miss Redgrave would not use the Academy Awards as a platform for her very boring arguments, and he got a much bigger round of applause than she did. That's, I think, the thing that's missing. Were someone to say that from the stage, I think in general about, Billie Eilish, again, talking about stolen land, I don't think such a person, unless they're, I don't know, Lee Greenwood or someone, would be brave enough. It would have to be an extremely... Spielberg goes up there and says something like that. I just kind of can't see the opening for that being greeted pretty warmly in Hollywood. And yeah, I mean, that's a bad thing. I'll give you all of this. These bad opinions that are essentially vaguely, let's have a revolution, or nothing is meaningful, or we need to tear it all down, and we're part of fallen people, and everything like from America to Israel needs to go. They're depressing, but the one way I get around that feeling of depression is to contextualize them and say they're foolish and bound to fail. That doesn't mean I don't need to do anything like talk to you about it and think about it. And if it starts getting too much traction among people I respect, say something. But that is how I think about them.
I will say that one thing that is a little interesting is I've noticed that people are physically feeling weighed down from the level of the discourse and how negative it is all the time. And I don't know if this is true on the right, but on the left, I do see a lot of people coming up in defense of joy. Like they feel like they have to couch why they're allowed to be joyful or experience pleasure despite how terrible everything is. And it's like, it is part of the revolution to take care of yourself. It is okay to have some like fun and joy so that you can, fight against capitalism. Capitalism wants you to be a tired, upset puddle. And no, we must rise with joy to fight again. And so that I think is a very telling
joy and pitchforks.
Joy and pitchforks. Like you're gonna have one at a time. Let's see. Joy is the act of resistance. Where did you find that?
This was a mailer outside. I was talking to my wife. What's the dumbest slogan of the woke era? And as I was having this conversation, I looked down in a pile of mail not that we got, but like a apartment building where everyone pulls their mail that we were visiting, and that was on the top. I'm like, this is it. This is the dumbest one there is.
but that people need that right now. It seems like there's so much weighing everybody down. You're supposed to just be like in the mud so often. As opposed
to the Middle Ages when people were just uplifted and thriving. Like I just hate the statement so much.
We lived in the mud.
No, but again, this is actually a critical point because I think all of the stuff that's happening right now is very lightly connected to material condition, which I think something you were bringing up, Mike. It's not about your material conditions at all. It's about the emotional surge that people are feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it is the emotional surge, but it's not that there's an emotional surge in the sense that there's a cause for the emotional surge. It is the lack of psychological tools that those people have to cope with emotional surge. My point is that people have been miserable from the beginning of the world. The oldest texts that we have from like Mesopotamia, when the ghosts abound, people were writing about the misery and muckish life that they were trudging through.
I mean, maybe the demons were even a nice distraction.
I mean, I'm sure that was part of their psychological cope with misery. I'm sad. I'm going to invite somebody to banish all those bad vibes away. The point is that there's nothing new or unique about being miserable. The question is, do you burn down your town because you're sad? And if your only way to deal with your pathetic existence as a human is to take it out on your neighbors, then you have been poorly raised as a human. The whole experience of civilization is to teach you how to not externalize your pain and loneliness on your neighbor and fucking deal with it. So to me, every time that I hear but they're feeling crushed. Yeah, we all do. It's the human existence. We all do, and we all have since we have evolved from whatever kind of ape we came from, whatever simian creature preceded us. That is the human condition. If you can't deal with it, maybe it is, something to say about the environment, the education system. And I do say that, and this is why I talk about art and symbology and what kind of messaging is being created. The point is that we do not give people the tools to cope with this misery without turning it out on their neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple things. One, I think that joy as the act of resistance is the answer to don't worry, be happy. It is be happy so that you can worry. Use your happiness to fuel future worry. Now, Adaam, you say this because you're Israeli and you feel connected to your fellow man, and you have you give meaning to the civilization with which you grew up and lived. Americans don't feel this way. We just feel angry and disconnected and have way more mental illness than Israelis do. In fact, Israel and Poland, right, have the least amount of worry.
Israel is like the third happiest country in the world, according to the latest.
Yeah. Because,
metric.
They know the stakes are real. And when nothing is real, when nothing is real and everything is possible, into that maw comes the idea of the black pill and that we live on stolen land. So I interviewed this guy for, let me just do this. I have a couple of visuals here. It's not only how to, it's of course the gist. Sorry to screw up the mic. And so I interviewed this guy who writes for the New York Times.
For the listeners, for the podcast listeners, because some people still consume podcasts merely as an audio experience, Mike just changed the branding of his microphone from how to the gist. So we are now at a different phase.
Right.
Secondly, he is now showing us the book. Show us the book again.
Read the title.
Mutiny, The Rise and Revolt of the College-Educated Working Class by Noam Scheiber.
Right. So Noam writes for the New York Times. He's the labor correspondent. And what I read the book, I talked to him, and by the end of an hour-long interview, I was like, I get it. I get what the thesis is, maybe even more than he intended, which is, I asked him a question. It's all about labor unions, and he follows a couple of people that we might identify with labor unions, but mostly one of his characters is a Grinnell graduate who lived in a tent and toured with a puppet show for a year before, and tried to be an actor before working in a Starbucks and then trying to unionize. And another one is a Marxist who wore an Antifa t-shirt to their Rhodes Scholar ceremony, who went undercover into a Starbucks to try to unionize. So it's all these unionizing college workers who are dissatisfied with the workplace. And so I asked him, when it comes to the revolution versus a $3 raise, which one do they choose? And he didn't know the answer because there's no clear evidence that they chose their material conditions. So the whole thesis is something like, these people are so upset. In general, the state of the economy makes them upset. There's great information about how recent college graduates are in a worse position, and there's less of a premium for having gone to college than there used to be. And they feel betrayed by the you have to go to college not just message, but the way they instituted it in schools, and that was misleading, and that didn't do people many favors. So there's a lot of good economic explanations. Even the people since there's been college graduates who just took jobs that you don't need a college degree for, and in the past those people did so much better. But now they don't, and now they feel betrayed. But it's all of a piece. So when, for instance, the Starbucks union put out a tweet saying not just free Palestine, but there was a graphic of a bulldozer going through a fence, and this was tweeted out on October 10th, and it caused a huge kerfuffle with the corporation and the union. Some of the union said, take it down. But what he quotes people in the book is saying, this was great because the people who came into our store who really agreed with us gave us so much momentum. And there's a quote in there that said, it provided the most revolutionary moment there was. And then I asked him, did it help their negotiating stance in trying to get $3 more for the workers who weren't so invested in the Israel question? And he said, I can't say it did. In fact, the evidence is that it didn't, but it doesn't matter. So it seems like it's material, but when you stack up the material against all this other mishigas, all this other depression, all this other, everything is fine, dog in the flames type way of looking at the world, I think the depression wins out. I think Greta Thunberg should be best understood not as a climate activist and someone with a deep insight into climate or Gaza, but she should be understood as a mentally unwell young person. And the fact that she became the poster child of the children's crusade is pretty telling.
So I agree with everything you said, including the Israeli point, I will just conclude by adding that this is why I care so much about the art and the symbols that we're putting out there. You're saying that Israelis are, find connection and find meaning in a way that is focused more on building. And in fact, even if this is not, I'm very critical of Israel on so many fronts. And I think the criticism also comes from a sense of what Israel should stand for and where it falls short. So I have that model in my head, and that model was created by stories and history and immersion in the artistry that has been developed for, hundreds of years of Jewish and Zionist tradition in literature, in poetry, in craft, telling you what the ideal is to aspire to and what it looks like when you step out of it, when you fail. For a lot of Israeli leftists who certainly have some form of Bibi derangement syndrome, the reason they are so antagonistic to Bibi, whether or not his policies is correct or not, the reason they're so antagonistic to him is because so often he himself and also the coalition that he built around him steps out of the ideal that has been presented as what good, noble Zionism looks like. He has surrounded himself by buffoons and petty tyrants and goons. And to many Israelis, this is morally abject. I mean, sure. I agree with that. But the reason I have that idea, that I have an ideal that they are falling short of, is because of the culture that raised me. And that's why culture matters. And culture is the result, the sum of all those little cultural artifacts that surround us. That's art, that's narrative, that's filmmaking, that's public statements. That combines who we understand ourselves to be and how we measure ourselves. So if the answer to loneliness in the West is wear a kafia and the bloody hand, then that's lacking. That to me is lacking. It tells you that the only way for you to find connection and some kind of emotional redemption is through violent revolution, violent, bloody revolution. That's a bad path.
Yeah. So I guess to steelman the other side's argument, they would say something like, I don't wear the bloody hand and I'm not one who actually chants intifada revolution, but I don't criticize those who do because I see it as part of a call for progress. And a free Palestine to me means something like, I don't know if they would say a two-state solution, but an ideal of what the world should be. Yeah, there are those people there. I think that's probably, if what's animating them is totally absent for the nihilism or the annihilism, we're in a much better position than I think we are and that you're describing. The best thing we could do is, I raised two boys and one of them's at college now, and he always talks to me about some of the opinions that his fellow college classmates have, and he sees their side, but he is definitely not nihilistic. I mean, he's in many ways, he's an interesting kid because he likes arguments maybe way too much, but he also believes in things. And I don't know if it's a connection, a community or something. Maybe you could just do it intellectually or seeing the paucity of these arguments on the other side. And there's also, I've noticed so many, and maybe Ruffalo and Bardim are the exceptions to this because they seem pretty functional, but there are so many comorbidities, if you will, with the revolutionary spirit and everything we're talking about. So, these are often the kind of people who will valorize some sort of mental illness or neuroatypicality and brag about this in their social media profiles, and not to have this, or, queerness, which is more than fine, but they're almost pressured into adopting that sort of ideology. Yeah. It's a weird moment. It certainly is. I'll tell you something else that I just did recently, which is, okay, we're talking about the arts. And so I'm trying to think of someone who is an artist who maybe doesn't totally disagree with us, but would make the point, the purpose of the arts is to challenge us. And one of the reasons you're seeing a lot of revolutionary spirit is that if we were not to have that, if we were suppress that, we would hurt the arts. Okay, fine. I'm remembering,
and nobody's talking about suppression. I just wanted to be clear. I never said suppression.
Right, but
I want intellectually, publicly challenge it and call it for the horrible messaging that it is, and ideally create alternatives. I'm not saying at any point suppress.
Yeah. So I'm saying maybe suppress the instinct of someone who might commit this art. In other words, people wouldn't be drawn to this art, and it would be a better world if we had this maybe on the fringes, because you can't always stop this. But if it wasn't so central to so much of the way artists go about,
make it unattractive because it's stupid and dangerous, but not because I'm threatening to throw you in prison or pull resources.
Right. So this imagined person who might say the arts are there to challenge us, the arts are there to make us feel uncomfortable. I think of an interview I did less than a month ago with a writer for Grey's Anatomy named Jamie Denbo. Well, she was a writer for Grey's Anatomy. She now does this very funny podcast called the Beverly Podcast. She worked at Grey's Anatomy, and this was one of those shows that would say, we are here to explore social issues, and they won awards, certainly kudos for instance, dealing with some of the rules around abortion. They're a hospital drama, so people can't get abortions as easily post the Dobbs decision, and they put that out there. We're doing what artists should do. She also specifically talked about a storyline where GLAAD came in and told the cast some stuff or did some sessions about, I think, pronouns, but certainly identity. They turn it into art. This is the idea. We take what's in the ether, we process it through our art. So when she said soon after October 7th, yes, what I want to talk about is how I'm feeling as a Jewish person with all the ambient anti-Semitism, not even about Israel, just about all the ambient anti-Semitism. She had this great conceit because they always do shows ripped from today's headlines. And in Los Angeles, there were protesters outside a big hospital, and someone who needed treatment couldn't even get inside because these protesters were alleging that the hospital did some business with Israel. It was kind of the perfect Grey's Anatomy plot. And she was met with indifference and coldness and just the idea that, we're not in the game of shedding a light on anti-Semitism. So for me, as I imagine my person who is pro-arts and would talk about the place of arts, when this part of what the artist should be doing isn't allowed to come forth, it more or less, I think, probably confirms a lot of your thesis, Adaam.
It's related because we, as you mentioned, Mike, you, I, and I think Vanessa is in the journey of admitting it, are driven by pluralism and old liberal standards, which means that what we want is to give the opportunity to hear opinions and voices and have the argument creatively, publicly, with a underlying assumption that open society is a good thing. The revolutionary instinct is, as I said, annihilistic. It is about shutting things down and burning them, which means we are not interested in hearing all the voices. We're going to push for voices that immanentize the Eshkatan, as my former boss would say.
Well, maybe to close, and I don't know if you guys have this on the top of your head, but is there, I'm just imagining, like, what's the opposite of annihilism or nihilism, but and since we've been talking about art, is there a piece of art that in your mind sticks out as almost an antidote to annihilism?
That's pretty good. I think if I thought of it, I'm trying to think of things that I saw recently and they surprised me or resonated with me.
Or not even recently. It could be something from from back, that just now you're like, wow, I feel like I need that more than ever right now,
Yeah, I wish I could think of this. Because a lot of times I'll be watching an older film, and not even that older, right? 2007. And they won't have to hit to use a Catholic term, the Stations of the Cross with "to be sure" and "so as not to offend." And they could just take, without even trying, they could just, and not being offensive, just take a couple more chances and be a little more surprising in how they presented the world, as if I wasn't being manipulated. And this is not great because I'm not coming up with the great example of what that was that I was watching, saying, this is so great. This is so refreshing. I love this so much. Adaam, you come up with an answer and I'm going to think. Okay. I'm going to cogitate and try to remember what it was.
My immediate thought, if I go to the 2000s, I was a big fan of The Practice and Boston Legal. And they did this thing of, always arguing about politics. This is not high art by any means, but it is a very interesting way of taking political questions and never leaving the the episode with a sense of resolution or righteousness, like a simplistic righteousness. I think later seasons of Boston Legal started making that sin, but early days, Practice and Boston Legal would be very troubling. And it felt like they wouldn't write a script until they challenged every single perspective that was being presented in that story and tested where it falls short. I thought that was a really, really good way of and you know, the setting of a courtroom is perfect for that, because you literally have people monologuing at each other and trying to stress test their views. So I thought that was a great model for a pluralistic America, and showing that, you know, there are no simple answers, and people suffer without there being a simple villain that's inflicting that pain upon them.
Okay.
But that's not like it's not a high art that reaffirms life or anything, but that's that's certainly not annihilistic. It encourages the process. It encourages the conversation.
I'll give you two. I love The Leftovers, and
I've heard it's very good.
It's very good, and I think it embodies a lot of this, a lot of what you're talking about. And I just love, I love everything that's written by Tom Peretti, and a lot of it's really simple. The original, he wrote the book that Election, the Matthew Broderick movie, was based on. So I don't know. That's dark. You know, it's dark. People aren't happy. But I also think that if it were done maybe in this moment, things would get in the way of the expression of maybe making Reese Witherspoon's character. Maybe they'd want to elevate her, give her more texture, or make the teacher seem more like a predator, which I guess there was a predator character. I don't know. It's just more, I'm going to write a story based on what I saw growing up in New Jersey when sweaters were itchy and things didn't work out, and someone got a bug bite and their eye swelled up and everything was disgusting. And that really appeals to me. Oh, anyway, that's Election. That's not even The Leftovers. The other thing I would say is Lou Reed's New York is just one of my favorite albums. And it's a series of op-eds set to music, in fact. Some of them ran or at least one of them ran as an op-ed on the pages of the New York Times. And that, Lou Reed is a dark, dark guy, and probably at times a revolutionary, but he was also really cynical, and I would say deeply realistic. And his, you know, you ever hear his song, Good Morning, Mr. Waldheim? You'd like that, because he tears into Jesse Jackson, who just died, and all the obituaries were mostly hagiographic. But this was just a guy at the time saying, Jesse, do we have common ground after you meet with members of the PLO? And I'm like, all right, that was probably the best reviewed album of whatever, 1987, 1988. It totally stands up. It's what I love rock music to be. And I don't know that such a thing could exist today.
On albums, I will have. The entire discography for me of Randy Newman is that many nights ago I got into an argument with, I think it was Matt Welch. Yeah, it was Matt Welch about Randy Newman, and I was very disappointed to see that somebody who
you once trusted their judgment,
who presumes to be American music connoisseur, to be so dismissive, to be so knee-jerky dismissive of Randy Newman's work. So I found that to be shameful and discrediting.
Matt Welch, called out.
But I think I've at least managed to move the needle ever so slightly by convincing him that the lyrics are much more deceptive than they are, that they appear. The point is that he takes political stories, but he also takes a lot of human stories, and every single story in every single song, whether it's funny or dark or biting, it's never straightforward. And I think when things have that slant, when they contradict themselves, when they collapse on themselves, it opens something up in the listener's experience, because it's not dogmatic, and it's not a program that tells you how to think. It leads you one way and then, you know, undermines you and have you contend with the contradictions of the character or the story or the political statement. With my favorite, not my favorite, but maybe the most apt song far from my favorite, by the way, but maybe the most apt song for our discussion is a song that starts with a father talking to his child, saying, the opening line is, I ran out on my children, and I ran out on my wife, and I'm going to run on you too, babe.
Yeah.
And I've done it all my life. Before I go, I want you to know something, and that I hope you'll understand. I just want you to hurt like I do.
Well, that sounds pretty nihilistic to me,
No,
though.
that's my point. The song is so strong because it makes you think about the pain. You see the character, you see that there's a character that goes through pain, and he's obviously inflicting that pain on their children, and their children are going to carry that pain. You can see the cycle, and it's sung in such a We Are the World anthem-y atmosphere, but the bottom line is that we all have that instinct. We all have that. It is natural to us to, when we are in deep pain, to say, you know what? I just want you to hurt like I do. This is the real We Are the World. The point, obviously, is we don't want this to guide our lives, but Randy Newman is not trying to preach. He's pointing out to something in human nature. So that's why I think that's
and he's also king of the unreliable narrator,
exactly.
Right? Last night I saw Lester Maddox on a TV show talking to some smart-ass New York Jew, but it was Dick Cavett, who's a Gentile, of course.
Right. That little bits of humor, that it's not just the unreliable narrator is a villain, as a bad person. He's also, sometimes it's just like not paying attention.
Sure. I mean, the guy from Short People, Randy Newman doesn't agree with him.
Right, of course.
All right, I will briefly add my additions, although I kind of got stuck on the TV theme from the first example, but I mean, maybe my examples are a bit literal, but maybe Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, she does not want the world to end, man. She's going to go out there again and again to stop apocalypse, and she's going to do it with, fun, some fun on her side. So that's like one piece of low art. And then this is a more contemporary one, but I really enjoyed Heated Rivalry, as many women of my age did. And I think part of the reason why people liked it so much was because it was just a love story, basically. And there was like, the stakes were pretty low, and like nothing really bad happened. And like, it was just sexy people falling in love, and that was it. And that was also kind of, in a way, an antidote to all the kind of art that has to be so heavy all the time.
I don't have a problem with heavy. I mean, I don't have a problem with not heavy, but heavy is not a problem. The problem is programmatic, that it needs to be like,
yes.
Why aren't you dealing with?
Right. And it's like, it's beloved on the left because it's like centering queer characters, but it's like, it doesn't have to just follow the typical, like, they're going to have a horrible whatever life. I think that was part of the appeal of it. And then, of course, I'll throw in...
Centering is such an awful word.
Sorry.
Can we annihilate? Can we annihilate the words?
Burn it all to the ground. Language pyre.
Become a language police.
Yeah. And then, Adaam, the song that you and I have written about in the newsletter before, we like that Ben Folds song, Christine.
Oh, of course.
I think the kind of one of the messages in that song is like, touch grass, get into the real world, and
let's work on a theory.
Do not communicate via Facebook because it'll all go terribly dark in caps locks.
How about this theory? I'm going to throw this out there. Piano is not a nihilistic instrument. Piano with chords, right? With being able to play more notes at once than almost any other instrument. Because Ben Folds and Randy Newman, perhaps the piano composers and the pianists among us, will deliver us. Yes, I know Lou Reed was mostly guitarist, but I do think there's something about guitar that's a little angry. And then, what Billie Eilish composes on, all the electronic composition, you're not really touching anything real. Maybe that leads to a little bit of depression. Okay, we could spin this out.
I love this. I love this. Is this academic poetry? This is the sort of stuff that people get their fake PhDs on. But but I will add.
Sure.
I'll even
don't touch grass. Touch ivory.
I think there's we can even
ethically sourced, of course.
You can add a layer to this because it's not just the chords. The Billie Eilish sounds. The whole movement of, and I love electronic music, so it's not I'm not really against it. But the electronic sounds are often about reducing the timbre of each single note. It's not just that there are less chords, it's that the sound itself is being reduced to a single waveform. So the piano, when you hit that, one of the reasons when you're like, if you've ever played on a real rich, Steinway or Yamaha, was ideally with a grand piano that's opened and in a nicely acoustic room, and you just hit one note and it reverberates. That one note is so rich and can make you feel things. You don't need to play a chord even. The note includes so many harmonics that you already experience something. Whereas electronic music is all about reducing the harmonics and getting back to it's a deconstructive form of art that reduces the sound to its thinnest sound wave form. So there's a theory. There
is. And think about the 27 Club, the musicians from Jimi Hendrix to Janis Joplin to Kurt Cobain, who died at 27. Were any pianists, right? There were either Jim Morrison, there were singers or guitar players. I'm not saying being a pianist is protective of suicidal ideation. I'm just laying out facts. That's all I'm doing.
Asking questions.
I'm raising answers.
I will add to Vanessa's Joss Whedon reference. I think that Firefly is actually really, quite literally, anti-annihilist and anti-utopian. One of my favorite lines from it, which I think are like almost unintentionally liberal conservative, in the final stance that the Firefly crew takes at the end of the film, was called Serenity. At the end of Serenity, they say, we are going to war against a group of people who thought they can make man better. This is quite literally an anti-utopian stance that they take at the end, which I find very moving.
Right. But didn't the Avengers, who was the guy who snapped his finger? What was his name
Thanos.
of that one? Who was the bad? Yeah. So he represents that. And the screwy thing is that Hulk was an Avenger, and I guess Ruffalo, for the paycheck, in that instance, stood athwart nihilism.
This is a funny thing. I wonder if you, before the script came out, if you'd ask some of these Hollywood actors, given climate change and overpopulation, would you contemplate the idea of an equalizing scenario where half the population just vanishes? That's also a Dan Brown story, by the way. Dan Brown, I really, really hate Dan Brown, but I can't stop reading him. This is like that's the guiltiest sin that I have. And in one of his stories, the villain in that story concocts a plan of spreading a plague that sterilizes a third of the population randomly. The conclusion of the book, I'm not kidding, is that the main characters, the heroes who have failed to stop the plague from spreading, sit together and say, should we have stopped it, or should we find a cure for this? And they say, well, no, he's right. This prevents overpopulation and climate change, so we should just accept it. We should just turn the other way. That's the conclusion of the book. Basically, they sided with Thanos. So I do wonder, and that came out before Endgame, so I do wonder if, ask the same Hollywood actors on there thinking about sterilizing a third of the population before the film came out, I would bet that some of them would have been for it.
Yeah, Bill Gates, I guess, is not in good stead in the public's imagination these days. But, just a few months ago, he withdrew his support for the end is nigh messaging. And I think he rightly said, not an idiot, that even though our climate change problem is a big problem, we just do more harm than good when we convince people that the world is going to end and that there's nothing we could do. And I think that whole Greta Thunberg, Cassandra, or Bill McKibben, who a lot of people who are environmentalists love, but part of his message was always, this is a referendum on our character as people versus a challenge to be overcome, like every great challenge to humanity. I think I could see why it was attractive. I could see why it was attractive for reasons outside nihilism. We were just maybe learning this and people needed to ring the bell for the call. But man, did it go way too far. And man, was it the wrong tactic. And now maybe I'm a little bit hopeful that we're having a reset on it. Though with so many other things that we had to reset. Two things. One, we're going to go way too far in the other direction. You might say. Aha. We're going to go too far in the other direction. But also, we're going to just memory hole the fact that this was ever the avant-garde, de rigueur way of looking at a big problem.
Mike Pesca, host of The Gist and How To. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys are the best.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. Follow us on uncertain.substack.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're feeling generous, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends and enemies. Until next time, stay sane.